Welcome back to Misdiagnosed. I'm your host, Caitlin Pyle, and I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I'm still recovering from the weekend. I'm working on reorganizing my life and reconsidering relationships, and it's exhausting. The process is exhausting. The conversations you have to have, not only with other people, but with yourself, are difficult. They're difficult and they drain your energy. If you're someone who's like, energy, everything's energy, like what's that? I was one of those people. That's how I know they exist. Calling BS on the things that I don't understand, right? And maybe you're still there. Maybe that's a knee-jerk reaction for you. I know that it's a habit that I am still working on breaking. When someone mentions something that I have never heard of, I'm like, how have I not heard of this? If I haven't heard of it, then it's not relevant to me, and you automatically dismiss it. Or even, as I've mentioned before, like someone recommending a book. If a friend of mine, a new friend of mine, had never recommended Medical Medium to me and said I'd love it, and if I hadn't picked it up and started reading it, thinking maybe this has entered my sphere of consciousness for a reason, I wouldn't be sitting here right now talking to you. It changed my life. It changed my brain, and you just never know. We'll say dealing with people who are constant skeptics and they think that skepticism is healthy when all they're doing is willfully keeping blinders on, refusing to consider new information. It's only hurting them. They can make you feel crazy. They can make you doubt yourself. They can make you feel small and insignificant, like you're the one wasting your life. It can have an emotional effect on you that will drain your mental energy to the point where it's hard to get up on Monday morning after a weekend with that person and want to do the things that you know you want to do. Because number one, you don't have the energy, and number two, there's now a part of you, again, questioning what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, if the person that you consider to be significant in your life, your significant other, is not on board and just wants to conveniently ignore those parts of you. It's really painful to be ignored in that way and to be suppressed. And so I'm taking some major steps and making some major changes in my life landscape currently so I can take some of that energy back. I don't know what I was thinking. I've been with this person before. I've broken up with them before, and I can remember how it felt having all of my energy back. If anyone's ever read the book Attached, you'll know what I'm talking about. When you're a secure or even a secure anxious person and you're with an avoidant person with an avoidant attachment style, it changes you in a way, like it causes you to have anxiety where you wouldn't normally have anxiety, because it just feels like nothing you do seems to have any impact. It's just like gets bounced off and not reciprocated, just thrown back at you in a very subtle way, and it's hurtful. And if that person isn't even open to understanding what they're doing or how it's affecting you, then it's time to move on. It's funny, I'm recording this podcast knowing that the person that I'm dealing with right now doesn't listen to my podcast, isn't going to listen to my podcast, will never listen to my podcast, so I can share with my audience openly. And I don't hold anything against that person. I really don't. I view him with a lot of love and compassion because I understand where he is. Truly, I mean, I don't know that I've ever had an avoidant attachment style, but in some ways I can definitely see in the past where I avoided difficult subjects because I didn't want to admit certain things or see my own weaknesses. And that was like before I got divorced, And I can look back at that in honesty and see that about myself. But some people just aren't there yet, and everybody's on a different path, so there's no judgment. As much as my old self might want to come out and want to be angry at how this person's treating me, right? That's a victim mindset, and that's an ego place. It's not who we truly are. We're pure love energy, and everything's kind of been muddled when we've been taught that who we are is something other than that. We've formed this belief about ourselves and about who we are based on the opinions and reactions of other people. How we were treated as children, how we were treated in school, by our teachers, by our friends, by our not friends, by people at church, by our interpretations of the Bible or other sacred texts, right? All those things have informed who we think we are. And if there's one thing that I'm really concentrating on is making sure I know who I am and who I'm not. I think everyone has to work through rising above who they're not, turning around, turning away, and walking away from that old shadow self, that shell self that's not really them, and walking into the light, walking into who they really are. and living that and not letting memorized emotions or memorized states of being that you believe is you. Like, I used to wake up and feel just anxious and like every day, like not wanting to do anything. And I didn't realize that there was no real reason to feel that way. It was just memorized in my body. Like, this is what happens when I wake up in the morning. I feel blah, like I don't want to do anything. And that's slowly going away as I every morning wake up and I say, let's remind myself who we are, what I'm here to do, what's amazing about life, how excited I am to be here, all the fun stuff I get to do, because that's what life is actually about, growing and having fun and having experiences. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to feel pain, but we are always going to grow from those painful emotions and experiences. We're not going to see the miracle until after it's happened either. We're not going to be aware that the miracle is happening. I certainly didn't think that when Michelle gave me the copy of Medical Medium, the old 2015 version. I had no idea that it was going to change my life. One decision to open your mind to something new information can absolutely upend your entire life. So we left off the last episode talking about alloy in our brains. And it's funny, Anthony has this analogy of a potluck that everybody brings something to the table, so to speak, and nobody knows what's in any of it. So we all have this different alloy mix in our brains. And if you're just joining us and you're wondering why I just spent 5-6 minutes talking about my personal life, that's the way I like to do it. Like, just to give you a few minutes of what's going on in my life, what I'm learning, what I'm recovering from, what I'm growing from, and then I jump back into where we were. So we're going over, this is the last part of Brain Savers Chapter 3. This is Anthony William, the medical medium, his new book, Brain Saver, that came out in October. We're going chapter by chapter, and some chapters are longer than others. So we're doing 3 episodes on your alloy brain, talking about heavy metals. It's not necessary to have listened to the first 2 in the series on metals. Battle of the Metals is what I've titled it. But there's a lot of good information that could blow your mind, but hopefully not oxidize your alloys, right? And that's the issue, is when the toxic heavy metals enter your brain and mix together and become this alloy, it can denature your natural tissue, your brain tissue, over time. It becomes destabilized, the metals. And that's what creates oxidation, and it oxidizes the brain tissue at the same time. So think about copper and bronze, the patina that it gets. That's what oxidation is. It's green buildup that you can clean off of a copper penny, that patina. In the antique world, Anthony pointed out that patina is the prized proof of authenticity and that you're not supposed to clean it, which is true as an antique lover myself. But in your head, the last thing you want is patina. Rust is another way that metals can oxidize and show it. So think about scrap metal that's bubbling and flaking and there's rust all over it. You do not want that in your brain. Because rust and patina, those things mean corrosion and oxidation, and that means more heavy metal runoff, leaching, outgassing, and spreading over your brain tissue. And if you're interested and you have a copy of the book Brain Saver, there's actually a whole bulleted list of the different combinations of toxic heavy metals and how they react and oxidize differently depending on the specific alloy blend. For our purposes here on the show, I'm not going to go through that list. If it included how to know what metals you have in your brain and things like that, which there's no way to know scientifically, medically, there's no testing to figure it out. There's no purpose in going through the list. I mean, a short example is that when toxic calcium and aluminum combine together, the calcium binds and builds up around the aluminum, encasing and weighing it down, which pushes the alloy deeper into the brain. So point being, all these metals react together and can cause more problems. The alloys can form in the brain from 3, 4, or more different metals. It's not just pairs of metals, which is the list that Anthony includes. The overall point is that all the metal alloys are different in everyone. We all have it, and we have to take action to remove the metals so we can set ourselves on the course of healing. It's a need for us to save our brains. And having had 2 grandparents, both on my mom's side, die of Alzheimer's, and knowing now, thanks to Medical Medium, that is not an unknown disease without a cause. It just happens to old people. It doesn't just happen to old people anymore. It is because of mercury and other metals oxidizing in the brain and oxidizing the brain tissue. They're going to be taking our money and looking for a cure, trying to find a pill that'll cure it forever, and it's just complete bullshit. They're not going to find a cure in a lab looking for a pill that will stop what's happening. It's the metals in the brain, and you have to get them out, and it takes time. One thing I'm doing is drinking the toxic heavy metal smoothie, which you don't even need the book to have that recipe. You just Google toxic heavy metal smoothie, or I'm saying it wrong, sorry. It's heavy metal detox smoothie, medical medium, you'll find it. It's an easy recipe. There's cilantro in it, but you can't taste it really. Cilantro, orange juice, banana, blueberries, Illinic dulse extract, which is like a seaweed extract. Can't taste that either. I've been drinking it every morning for a couple of weeks now. And I think I'm going to upgrade to the heavy metal extractor smoothie, which the recipe for that is in the Brain Saver Protocols and Recipes book. There's a bunch of different recipes in there. I recommend both books. I recommend all the books. I have the whole library of medical medium textbooks. That's what I call them because that's basically what they are. And I am a student for life. I'm always learning. And that's why I'm doing this podcast. I'm doing this so I can learn more. And we always learn better by teaching what we learn. So, okay, trace minerals. Trace minerals are the main topic of this episode, this final episode of the series, Battle of the Metals, where we're going over chapter 3 in Brain Saver, Your Alloy Brain. Trace minerals are called by Anthony, this is his name for them, and I agree, our brain's peacekeepers. These are beneficial metals in our brains. They're there for reasons that are mostly undiscovered. What they do is transfer information. They keep our brains from shrinking and feed our brain's immune cells, which keeps them strong. But they're also there to do so much more. Now, everybody knows how important water is and electrolytes and all those things, but the truth of the matter is that the brain's electrical field literally cannot exist without water, electrolytes, and trace minerals in our bloodstream. If the water weren't there or the trace minerals and electrolytes weren't there, then the brain's electrical field would eventually be dry. It would get smaller and smaller, diminish itself, and eventually be dry. It would burn out neurotransmitters, other brain-related hormones, trace minerals that have been stored, and electrolyte reserves that are in the brain tissue. Brain strength would weaken. And really, Anthony says that this is the story of most people's lives. And I have to say, I agree. Like, I can see that my brain weakened over time from when I was in college, not drinking coffee, working sometimes 30 hours a week, going to school, 5 classes, working out, having friends, going to church. I was doing all kinds of stuff, and I didn't drink coffee. I barely had to study. I was more highly functional. It wasn't until I started getting really stressed and not eating as well when I lived in South America that I think my brain started to really burn out. And I can't say that I was concentrating very much on drinking a lot of water because I was drinking a lot of wine instead, and electrolytes weren't even in my vocabulary then at that point. Electricity can't just be there by itself. It needs a partner, right, biologically. And that means metals. Trace minerals and electrolytes. So just like we can't travel without metal, like a bicycle, car, motorcycle, plane, train, or bus, electricity is not going to be able to travel through the brain properly without metal, the right kind of metal, trace minerals and electrolytes. So you can think of lightning and lightning rods. Lightning in the sky can only be there in the first place from trace minerals that are in the clouds, water vapor, precipitation. We have the same relationship inside our brains. So just the way electricity seeks out trace minerals and electrolytes and water inside our body travels to our brain and helps transfer all the electricity. Anthony includes a side note that I found really interesting in the book. He says that if toxic heavy metal particles are polluting the atmosphere, they change storm patterns. And that makes lightning's electricity more aggressive, just as toxic heavy metals polluting our brain create storms in our brain. It's wild. But it makes sense. I mean, the same chemical reactions are happening outside our bodies as in our bodies. We are the universe. So one major function that trace minerals have is to balance electricity. Electricity is attracted to trace minerals, and that's how the trace minerals stop electricity from going rogue and getting out of control. So our brains have a supernatural electromagnetic force that draws the trace minerals to their appropriate stations. They know where they're supposed to go. That's how intelligent our brains are. That's how intelligent we are. And our bodies know the specific areas of need in the brain and body. So our brain can draw, with the electromagnetic force, those trace minerals to exactly where they're needed. Trace minerals are what prevent extreme heating from the electrical currents. And so they regulate those currents and run them cooler when needed, because trace minerals, when they're in their natural state, completely unlike the industrialized metals, the toxic ones, they regulate temperature when electricity from the brain hits them. Trace minerals are like the equalizers that used to be on stereo sets. I think Anthony does a really good job in his books with using analogies to describe certain things that might seem really complex otherwise. And this is one of them. Stereosets, where we raise or lower the control according to what we wanted on those equalizers. Trace minerals' role in the brain is just like that. And it's also similar to the liver's role of being a peacekeeper in the body. But in the brain specifically, the trace minerals are the peacekeeper role. They keep the tranquility, and the electricity actually searches for trace minerals. And without them, your electrical grid is going to struggle. We need them to eat, breathe, survive. We need them to live, and we have to get them from somewhere, even if they're in really poor form or we're going to die. The problem with that, though, is we often do get the very poor forms from places like bioengineered foods, also known as GMOs, city water or town water that's been treated, over-harvested agricultural fields, even organic ones that are not replenished, and farmed animals and farmed fish that are not fed nutrient-dense foods. We're getting minimal exposure to quality trace minerals and electrolytes and maximum exposure to toxic heavy metals. It's nuts. Trace minerals were meant to be the only metals inside our brains. They have a physical presence and a purpose and a metaphysical presence and purpose. The same kinds of minerals that are in our brains, the trace minerals, are the same kinds of minerals that are in the atmosphere, part of the stars, in the heavens, out in the universe. Like, we are connected to the universe by our trace minerals. Isn't that wild? Trace minerals are in our atmosphere. Of course, there's a lot of toxic heavy metals in our atmosphere too, but we are part of the universe. We are the universe. We're not in it, we are it. It's kind of like being in traffic. I listened to Rob Bell, his podcast. If you guys have heard of Rob Bell, he's an ex-pastor. Now he's a speaker, author. He's amazing. Really encouraging guy, especially from someone coming from a really conservative background to like live your life in freedom. He did an episode where he talked about being like saying you're in traffic when you are traffic. It's kind of the same concept. We're not in the universe. We are the universe. Yeah, and when a metal has been industrialized and denatured, there's no benefit anymore. So even if it was a trace mineral, like copper, for example, that can be really confusing. People will say, no, copper is good. We need lots of copper. What really happens is copper is industrialized a lot of times. And when that happens, say it's turned into a pot or a pipe, it is now deformed. There's no opportunity for it to be beneficial. It's been destroyed. The residue of that pot or the pipe or the tool or the jewelry, the water bottle, whatever it is no longer beneficial. It cannot be used as an active, bioavailable trace mineral inside the body anymore. It has become destructive, dangerous as a metal because it's been denatured and industrialized. Our Earth, which is also in the universe, is made partly of living trace minerals. And when they are kept in their natural state, they can be used by the body, but only if they're in the right amounts for the right purposes. But when you forge those metals, it removes the natural earth energy that exists in them. We're part of the earth. We're not on the earth. We're not separate from it. We are part of it. Everything's made of the same stuff. And when a metal is industrialized, forged, it's lost its memory in a way. It's become toxic and destructive to our bodies. Its natural nature is disrupted. Doesn't have that active ability to participate for our benefit, for the planet's benefit anymore. That's why toxic heavy metals are the worst enemy of trace minerals, but also vice versa. There's hope here, right? That's why this is the best way to close this series on metals in our brain, because there's a way to draw them out. Trace minerals are the polar opposite of toxic heavy metals, which hold a destructive charge, and trace minerals hold a very beneficial charge, and they neutralize toxic heavy metals' destructive charge. But when that happens, that means they can't do what they do best because they've been neutralized, and they get sacrificed. Because toxic heavy metals make electricity in our brains run even hotter, and one function of the trace minerals is to cool electricity without dampening it or hampering it, the extra heat from the toxic heavy metals makes the trace minerals work overtime. That's what happens. They have to work harder, and they get diffused. If we have an abundance of trace minerals that we've gotten from natural places, so not GMOs, not city water, not farmed fish, we're getting them from herbs, leafy greens, fruits, wild foods like wild blueberries and honey, and vegetables, then they can manage and control this overheating to a degree. Certain very powerful trace minerals like the sodium cluster salts that are inside celery juice, and that's the reason why I drink 32 ounces of celery juice every morning, which sounds ridiculous until you try it. They can actually help diffuse the toxic heavy metals. It's one reason why trace minerals are toxic heavy metals' worst nightmares. Trace minerals can still burn up, though, and they dwindle and lose their strength over time because the toxic heavy metals are so destructive But the job of trace minerals is to make the toxic heavy metals less effective, taking away at least that toxic energy force that the metals got from their industrialization. And because the trace minerals are up against so much, it's so beneficial to keep fueling ourselves with the celery juice and other sources of trace minerals on a daily basis. And if we're not doing that, if we're not giving ourselves the right foods that have the good kind of electrolytes and trace mineral salts, it's really hard to restore the trace mineral assets to our brain. And so the brain heats up more, which, as we went over in the last episode, just very briefly, you end up with bipolar-like symptoms, among other things, if the brain heats up in certain places and it can't cool down. But wait, there's more. Because it's likely that our blood is also filled with fats and acids, a lot of times look around. Most people in the world are not healthy people. And when I say the world, I mean our country. There's other countries that are in similar boats as us, but the United States, look around, go to Disney World, go to Walmart. Most people's blood is constantly filled with fat and acid. There's more metal melting and oxidation that can occur then. And that creates extra toxic metal debris, which conflicts with the trace minerals, and more of the trace minerals are diminished. And they can even get absorbed in the melting and oxidative process. They get sucked into the toxic heavy metal alloy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because those trace minerals can help diffuse the metals within the alloy, the toxic ones. And while all the trace minerals can help diffuse the toxic heavy metals, like celery juices, sodium cluster salts do a better job of it. Actually, because celery contains complete electrolytes. That's why I drink it every morning. Complete electrolytes. It hydrates us in a way that a Gatorade is not going to. While it's a good thing that the trace minerals can diffuse all this heavy metal stuff, it also means that we're losing more trace minerals that are supposed to be responsible for brain function. So it's kind of like a win-lose scenario. It cancels out. You're still on the losing side. And toxic heavy metals are not supposed to be in our physical brain and body's world. So it's not a fair fight with the trace minerals versus toxic heavy metals. It's not fair. And the battle of the metals, the toxic heavy metals, is a major part of why humans have so many brain problems. We've touched on this. Obviously, it's not just bipolar. It's so many other brain problems. And Anthony says, specifically, you can read all the neuroscience literature you want, follow all the leading alternative and conventional health experts, listen to all the health podcasts you want, and you won't see any of this addressed. Doctors and health experts don't realize that toxic heavy metals are in the brain unless they've come across this information. And if they have, it's unlikely that they're going to disclose that they've gotten the information from a medical medium. And that's true. So there are people out there that do talk about metals, but they don't have the rest of the information that's in this book to fill in the blanks. And there are a lot of blanks. So be aware of that, because some of these people, coming from a marketing background, I know they're very good at marketing. You'll see health experts that are singing praises from the rooftops about healthy fats and fish oil and high protein, all for the brain. But if you follow that advice, what it actually does is it oxidizes the toxic heavy metals in the brain even more. So even though they're giving all this advanced information, it sounds so advanced, right? What it's doing is providing you with the opposite of healing. Point is, the world is quite oblivious to the battle of the metals in our brains. And Anthony encourages us to become the experts ourselves, which is why I'm doing this podcast. So I can really learn this information and feel confident in it by sharing it with you. And you can become more confident as well. I encourage you to get the book, especially the one with the recipes in it, and start eating some of the brain healing foods. Maybe take some of the supplements. Yeah, the encouragement overall is to rise above the machine. We're taught that the medical powers that be, like the medical establishment, pharmaceutical industry, healthcare industry, it's all marketed and labeled all pretty. And we're taught that they're all looking out for us. We learn as children that medicine has our best interest in mind. And there's really a lot of great reasons to think so. Like the nurse at our school, pediatrician, gives us a lollipop, right? Hands us a crutch if we break our leg or we twist an ankle or something like that. We grow up and hear about our family members and grandparents going through hard times and they get care at the hospital, including surgeries that could even save their lives. Or we hear about somebody who's been in a car crash and survived because they had life-saving ER care. We're told about some great advancements in technology and medicine, and we see headlines splattered all over newspapers and media. We do believe from seeing all that the whole of medicine is in our best interest, and we get a sense of safety from that. And then in university, we're taught that science is king, science is even God, and that science has all the answers. But with all the plagues that we're faced with today, we're being taught every day that science has it under control, sensible, reasonable answers. Then we also learn every day that this isn't true. There's thousands of examples where the teachings from medical professionals that they get from medical research and science in medical school are actually cover stories. The cover stories that are repeated and told over and over again to the rest of the population to where people believe that it's true. When you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth. One example is saying that the shingles virus and chickenpox are one and the same, but that's not true. They're two separate, different viruses. That's an example that Anthony gives here in the book. Yeah, we're taught that everything science offers us is concrete, indisputable, and legitimate. And it's easy to believe this when you do break your leg and you have a great orthopedic doctor and you leave the hospital in a cast. That kind of assistance is visible and it's part of the smoke and mirrors, right? It is a deception in the medical machine. Have one thing right and 100 things wrong, but we're still taught to believe that science and research in the medical field and the healthcare system are sanctuaries and can do no wrong. Listen to your doctor. I can't tell you how many times I heard that from people. Like, listen to your doctor, take your meds, you'll get better. Like, it's so pandering and gross how much faith people put in doctors who have no idea what's actually going on. Billions and billions of dollars go into scientific studies that are not applicable to children with chronic brain inflammation that are causing neurological fatigue and weakness of the limbs. They're not applicable to people on feeding tubes due to gastrointestinal disorders that stem from the brain. They're not applicable to people living through the daily realities of brain fog or bipolar disorder or people who are autistic. Still, the research and science and medical industry are sopping up all those billions of dollars that are going into medicine and using it for their bureaucracy. No dollars, in the meantime, are being directed to investigate chronic symptoms and conditions. The machine completely ignores what should be some of the most obvious discoveries in chronic illness, like toxic metals in our brains. But why do they not know about it? How is it even possible that they don't know about it? Is it that they do know and they're avoiding it altogether? Is it because they haven't discovered it or stumbled across it? Is it due to a lack of funding? I don't think so. You can make your own judgment call. Here's what Anthony thinks. This was really interesting. So we've talked a few times before about the classified medical industry, and they do know to a certain extent that metals can be in the brain and cause problems, and they are avoiding it. The publicly known medical industry is unaware, aside from the individual health professionals that are starting to have their suspicions now, because medical media has been teaching 35 years about the buildup of the trace amounts of the toxic heavy metals inside the brain. We know that lead and mercury, which are toxic heavy metals, when they get into the brain in large amounts, they cause death, right? What about the small amounts? If the large amounts cause death, don't the small amounts cause something? Why is that being ignored? So bits and pieces about toxic heavy metals and what they cause, the dozens of symptoms and conditions inside the brain and our organs, the whole story is not there, just bits and pieces. The hows, whys, whats, and wheres are all missing. And here's kind of a bomb to drop on you guys. One reason that the classified medical industry wants to avoid this information is that a big part of the reason why we have the metals in our brains in the first place is because of the medical industry itself. It's one of the major sources of mercury, aluminum, and toxic copper inside of us. So, of course, they're going to avoid it. And it's probably going to continue to be avoided many, many years. That's for sure. And there's another reason why it's avoided is that in order to actually fix the situation with the metals in our brains, we would need to take that initiative, and that would ultimately lead to us taking more alternative means because the medical industry doesn't have a solution. So even if the medical machine did decide to put toxic heavy metals at the top of the list to help billions of people heal, it would be stuck because there's no pharmaceutical treatment that would remove those metals. The medical treatments and pharmaceuticals actually contain the metals. And that conundrum, it's quite a big pickle. It would force the machine to go natural because only a completely natural approach is effective in removing the metals. And if the medical industry went natural, even if it got the natural approach right, the house of cards, it would fall because they wouldn't be able to consider it science anymore. It's sad. That's how you know that you have to take control. You can't wait for quote unquote science to discover it. They're not going to discover it because it would topple their entire industry. You can put all the science you want into all those alternative therapies and it could be respected among natural authorities, but it would still seem like 100% quackery to conventional models that rely on pharmaceuticals and synthetic crap. right? There's no way you can fix a problem in your natural body with a synthetic solution. And if the medical industry did own up to what they're doing, the truth about what's happening, who's going to be held responsible for the damage and injury that they have caused in babies, children, adults, even causing miscarriages for pregnant women? How would they provide restitution? They couldn't. They would completely topple their industry. So all this means that the medical industry will find it pretty much impossible to acknowledge all of the toxic heavy metals in our brains and the conditions they cause that we're going to be going over in this whole book as I go through it with you guys. They'll find other scapegoats, maybe. They'll be passed off as genetics. Billions and billions of dollars go into genetic science, not to provide us answers about why we're sick or to help us heal, but they want to learn how to clone or destroy our genes. Even if the people working in the genetic industry are not aware that this is the real end game. There's a real darkness in the genetic world of medicine, Anthony says. And if there weren't, those billions of dollars would go into looking at the metals inside our brains and how we can work to heal our conditions, our mystery illnesses, and how to remove the metals from pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical treatments. It's not going to change anytime soon. We're taught to believe that there's always a medical solution to a problem, and that is accurate in some areas of life. But the truth is, the medical industry works in its own best interest. And I've said this once and I've said it before, medical science and industry will protect itself before it protects people. That's us. There are individual doctors that are compassionate and they work for our best interest, but their hands are still tied because the industry leaves doctors in the dark. They don't know what's wrong with their patients because the industry is not going to tell them. And that's how they learn. They learn from the industry. And that means that we're not offered solutions to our problems. And when a doctor does step outside the box and finds problems and the medical industry doesn't like what the doctor is doing, the doctor gets in trouble. They could even lose their medical license sometimes. And that really threatens their livelihood and well-being. And that gives them another reason to maybe not be as upfront and forthcoming because they're trying to protect themselves. Wouldn't you, right? I definitely have compassion for what these people are going through. These compassionate doctors who are really trying. Solutions are in our hands. Yeah, that's why I really want to bring the information in this book to you. There is critical information about not just the role of toxic heavy metals in the huge variety of mental, emotional, and physical health issues, how the metals enter our brains in the first place. There's also lots of information on what to do about them. Start with the heavy metal detox smoothie. Even if you only drink it a few times a week, you're still going to have benefits. So I want you to be excited because you don't have to wake up in the morning like I used to and just feel like blah. Like you can feel excited because you know that you're free. You know you have the information now. You're learning the answers. You're learning the truth. So you have the power to take your health into your own hands. It's critical to know the truth about toxic heavy metals and how they're saturating our brains and how to remove them so we can have a better quality of life. This kind of stuff is not something to take lightly, not something to poo-poo and say, oh, it's no big deal. Like, I don't read about this on CNN. I don't read about this on Healthline. I Google toxic heavy metals and nothing comes up on the first page of Google, right? You're not going to see that stuff. There's huge powers at play that want to keep this information a secret so their industries don't fall apart. We have to take the lead in our own lives. You are the most important person in your life. We supersede the machine. We can rise above the authority, the so-called authority of our well-being, because that well-being is in our hands. Yeah, that's the end. That's the end of chapter 3. I'm excited to move on because the next chapter is all about the viral brain. And this is really going to hit home for me just as much as the metal chapter did because of my experience with having bipolar-like symptoms 2 years ago. I haven't had symptoms in almost 2.5 years. I haven't been hospitalized in 2.5 years. I shouldn't say I haven't had symptoms because I had like major depression and anxiety. So I had like certain mental health symptoms until I really got the stuff with the viruses under control. So I'm excited to go into that with you. I don't want to give too much away, but I hope you tune in to the next episode next week. And yeah, drop me a line if you're listening to this podcast and you're getting something out of it. You find it, even if you just like listening to me, drop me a line, say hi. My email address is in the show notes. So far, I'm editing this podcast and producing it and publishing it, doing all of the show notes all myself and working on a new website. I don't have a website. I just have hoping people can find it on all the different outlets. But I'm working on a website now, and I'm going to be turning each episode, at least from season 1. I'm not really sure, if I'm going to do episodes in depth like I've gone into the book on my blog, but I certainly will do summaries and point people to the episodes if they want more information, or even include transcripts of the episodes if people want to read. I feel like reading this kind of information is way less interesting than listening to this kind of information, just reading through it, not hearing someone's excited tone of voice like mine, because I am excited about this information. I never thought I'd be talking to people about science. But now that I understand how everything is connected and how science and spirituality are basically the same thing, but science hasn't discovered that yet, because they've already made up they operate from the false conclusion, false belief that spirituality is just pseudoscience, and, you should take it with a grain of salt because it's probably not true. And in fact, the opposite is true, that you should take science with a grain of salt. Like what is called science and what is called the truth in the medical, especially that front-facing public medical industry, what we see. And just for funsies, if you're still tuning in, you're in luck, because I am curious. If I go to a Google search, and I've done Google searches on the show before, if you go to Google and we type in toxic, heavy, can't type today, as usual, metals in the brain. That's exactly what I typed in. What comes up? What are 4 heavy metals that are toxic to humans? It's like a law website. I'm not going to click on it. I just want to see brain tumors and biopsy samples. So we've got National Institute of Health comes up second. Brain tumors and biopsy samples of patients with neurological disorder were also analyzed to relate neurotoxicity and heavy metal poisoning. Lead, mercury, and cadmium retain themselves in the brain for a longer period of time and are one of the causes of neurotoxicity. So we're not seeing any news headlines. This is what's interesting. We're not seeing Healthline, Mind, Body, Green. It's shocking that we don't see anything. I say it's shocking, but it's like, okay, this is so huge. It should be on every news outlet. But like in previous episodes, when I've Googled things and gone to the websites, you're going to see ads for pharmaceuticals. And so the pharmaceutical companies have toxic heavy metals in them. Of course, those websites that are sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies aren't going to put anything on there about toxic heavy metals. You end up with these like more fringe websites, or, this 1987 article on the NIH.gov website that's been cited by 300 people since almost 40 years ago. Yeah, and a lot of these websites that do come up. So there's a my.Cleveland Clinic website. It's talking about heavy metal poisoning, lead, mercury, and arsenic, instantaneously toxic doses. That's poisoning. That's what they're talking about. They're not talking about the trace amounts that can lodge themselves in our brains and interfere with the electricity like we've gone over in these episodes. There's a couple of ads, 12 worst foods for your brain, heavy metals in the brain, a couple of ads. But yeah, there's no pharmaceuticals advertising for this. There's a couple of products that come up, heavy metal detox products like herbs. I'm blown away. And if we click over to news, wow, dismissal of heavy metal baby food claims. There's been a dozen lawsuits recently alleging that a baby food company called Nurture contains toxic heavy metals. Interesting. Beauty creams. Okay, so this one's Daily Mail 17 hours ago. Doctors sound alarm over mercury in beauty creams as mom goes partially blind. So it's getting a little news coverage. That's exciting, but it's not talking about it on a very large scale. Yeah, like there's no news that's announcing that the cause of chronic illnesses and mental illnesses, these symptoms that have been labeled as disorders that are lifelong and that require all these medical intervention, drug treatments to manage, right? There's no announcements that these symptoms and illnesses are caused by toxic heavy metals, and there's not going to be. That's the point. But it still excites me that there's a little bit of information in the news. The truth of the matter is we still have to take matters into our own hands, remove the pharmaceuticals out of our brains or out of our bodies, start taking steps to not intake any more toxic heavy metals, and do what we can to remove the toxic heavy metals out of our brains. We have the power to do that. We do not need to lean on this false authority in our own well-being. We are the authority in our well-being because we are us. We are more familiar with us than any doctor will ever be, even with all the testing that they have, because the testing is really elementary, really rudimentary. Yeah. All right, that wraps it up. Thanks for tuning in all the way to the end if you made it. We'll see you in the next episode. This has been Misdiagnosed. Thank you so much for tuning in to Misdiagnosed. If this show has helped you in any way, please consider leaving a 5-star review on iTunes. Sharing your experience will help others who are lost in the darkness find their own way out of the science of lies. Please note that while I may go in depth into medical topics and have acquired substantial medical knowledge, I am not a medical doctor. I'm a researcher. I'm a messenger of hope for other survivors of industrialized psychiatry. Because of how toxic psychiatric drugs are, it can be extremely dangerous, even life-threatening, to suddenly stop taking certain drugs. This is especially true for antidepressants, antipsychotics, and benzodiazepines. The longer you've taken the drug, the more dangerous withdrawal can be. If you want to heal your brain and soul naturally, the way it was designed to do, please seek the help of a compassionate and patient-centered physician to start the process of withdrawing from them as safely as possible. It will take time for your brain to reacclimate to life without the drugs, and there are doctors out there who will support you in your quest to save your brain. Never give up. You can heal.